Free the land, free the land. Greetings, greetings. Starting to see people coming to live. Let the live fill up. As you come into this live, please share this live with your timeline. Thought I'd hop on here real quick and chop it over with the folks, with our peoples, you know what I'm saying, worldwide, nationwide. And drop this real quick topic, man. Revolutionary greetings, free the land, people, free the land. I'm just letting more people come into the live before I get started, because I don't like people to miss out, you know what I'm saying, on the beginning of the conversation or the beginning of, the topic. So I'm going to just let y'all come in. Share this live. I'm going to share it with my personal page real quick also. So I'm going to just let y'all come in and I'm going to share it. This is a very deep topic, man, that I don't want people to miss out on. So please share this live with everybody that you think need to be educated about this topic, man, because this is one of the most important, topics that I would ever speak on, period. And I want my brothers and sisters, no matter where you live on this planet, Africa, you know what I'm saying, the African diaspora, the Caribbean islands, you know what I'm saying, North America, wherever you live at, this is like the most important topic that all y'all need to get educated on. You feel me? So let me share it real quick with my timeline as we get into it, as we hop into it. Let me share it. Share it with my personal page real quick. Bingo. Let's get into it, family. I don't really usually do lives on Saturday, but it is what it is. I'm pretty sure we all still socially distanced. We still kind of on this quarantine thing as we fight this genocide warfare, you know what I'm saying, with police terrorism and COVID-19. But this is something that's more important because, matter of fact, I'm a springboard off of that. I'm a springboard off of everything that's going on right now with the COVID-19, with the police terrorism. Like what's next, or what's the continuation of what's going on. You know what I'm saying? This is coming from the Black Liberation Movement struggle right here. Something that's very, very important and should be at the center of our struggle as a Black Liberation Movement. And, I know a lot of the comrades and I know a lot of our brothers and sisters are in tune with this struggle. You feel me? Because this struggle is historically a part of our struggle. So, the conversation of reparations is taking off. The conversation of reparations is taking off. You know what I'm saying? For the genocide and holding those accountable for the genocide of our ancestors. You know what I'm saying? And the continuation of that genocide that's going on our people here today in North America, the new African nation. You feel me? And every other African, you see what I'm saying, peoples that's in the diaspora or on the African continent or globally. We all still fighting and struggling for this one aspect of our totality of our struggle, which is reparations. Conversation reparations is the topic today, man. Today I had to come back and redo this topic over because I did a YouTube video on this topic probably like 4 to 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. You feel me? The video has 47,000 views on this subject and topic. You feel me? So that's how you know that this topic is not really being, dialogued or discussed amongst African people, no matter where we be, but specifically in the Empire of the United States of America. This topic is a topic that's, it's touchy. I know a lot of individuals who don't want to touch it. It's kind of hard for certain people to talk about this topic because of the dehumanization of it and what took place on our ancestors. You feel me? It's kind of like a topic nobody really want to discuss. You feel me? But I'm the one that's been over the last 5 years, I refuse to let this topic die. I refuse to let this criminal act go without being held accountable for. You know what I'm saying? By our oppressors, by our historical enemies. I refuse to let this topic die. I'm never going to let this topic die. I'm never going to, let it get buried or suppressed or repressed by our historical enemies. You feel me? So I wanted to come to y'all today real quick and short and to explain why I came up with the petition that you seeing circulating on the internet now that I'm always trying to get y'all to share with y'all peoples. You feel me? And this petition been around for like the last 2 years, but it's starting to gain attention now. You know what I'm saying? Due to everything that's going on around the globe. You know what I'm saying? Because we're not separating our genocide. Because this is a pan-African struggle. Wherever black people, African people are being genocided by their government, you know what I'm saying, oppressed by their government, you know what I'm saying? This is the type of thing that we need to be speaking on, you know what I'm saying, and educating our people about. You feel me? So I just want to get more of our African brothers and sisters in tune with this so they'll know what happened to their ancestors that were taken out of Africa, that were taken out of West Africa, that was taken out of Biafra. You know what I'm saying? Y'all need to pay attention to this because this is what happened to, these are your ancestors also. So when I'm teaching and educating about these type of horrific things and these dehumanizing things that took place on our ancestors inside the empire of North America, this is for my brothers and sisters outside of America also, because these are your ancestors too. You see what I'm saying? We're brothers and sisters. This happened to your ancestors, period. You see what I'm saying? So let me hop on right into it. Before I get into it, let me just state this for the record. Anything that I state on this video, from my research and what I know, please, do yourself the justice in doing the research yourself. You see what I'm saying? Don't take my word for it. You feel me? I'm just the vessel speaking. You feel me? Teaching. But I want you to go do this research yourself so you can see and understand what I'm talking about today. You feel me? Don't take my word. Do the research yourself. When I do these lives, I do these videos, it's to help you see something that you might never, ever been taught or seen before. So I want you in tune to sharpen your skills in researching. It's all about researching so you can understand our oppression, our genocide. Because if you're not educated mentally on our genocide, there's no way you can understand what's happening to your people today, including our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa and all our brothers and sisters in the African diaspora. You know what I'm saying? This is to sharpen your research skills. Don't take my word for it. Do the research yourself. Iron sharpens iron. You feel me? I didn't get this far, you know what I'm saying, with what I know and what I've been teaching without research. Research is the most important thing when it comes to, understanding who we are as a people, history, historical materialism, things of that nature. This shit is important, period. Research. So being that, everything that's going on inside the Empire of America right now with police terrorism, we need to understand that we have to include something very important, which is reparations. Reparations is the most important thing that we should be struggling and fighting for. But you see a lot of these bourgeoisie movements, these integrationist movements, you feel me, that's out here on this front line, not really giving y'all, a concrete basis to stand on what we should be asking for from the empire of the United States of America. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bigger than police terrorism because it's a struggle that's been going on for over 400 years, but in the most recent 50 to 60 years, called the Black Liberation Movement. And one of those aspects of that struggle is us fighting for reparations of a horrific thing that took place on a nation of peoples. You see what I'm saying? Which is the Ma'afa, the great disaster, the genocide of our people here in this country. Now, the most important aspect of this genocide and why we need reparatory justice, and before I get into that, reparatory justice is the fact that, this is how can I put it? This is a sexual terroristic act. This was a sexual biological, because it's biological at the same time. When you're producing kids and babies, it now becomes biological scientifically. It's a biological sexual terroristic act, dehumanizing act that they made our ancestors go through in the slave periods of the antebellum capitalist system of slavery that too many of you don't know about and don't understand because you wasn't taught this in school. It's been suppressed throughout history. We had some of the greatest scholars touch on this. Some of the greatest scholars in history touched on it, but not like at the capacity that it needs to be touched on today, because it seems to get lost in the discussion of what happened to our peoples in slavery, which is slave breeding. Let me go ahead and put it out there. A lot of you might never heard of slave breeding. Write that down. Slave breeding. Slave breeding is something that we must take a look at and hold it as a concrete basis of the demand for reparations for African people in the African diaspora, whether North America, Central America, you feel me, the Caribbean islands. But I'm speaking specifically today of the Africans in North America, the new African. Is that it was a system that was created. It was a system that was created because not only did our ancestors, you know what I'm saying, were captured in bondage and were forced to, do extreme labor. Not only were they forced to do extreme labor, yes, we know our ancestors cultivated the land. They knocked down the woods. They cut down the woods and cultivated the landscape. Not only did our ancestors create the railroads, not only did our ancestors create the road structures, the highways. You feel me? Not only did they perform extreme labor and get exploited through extreme labor as they were captured, they went through something that was dehumanizing, physically and mentally. Think about this. They went through something biologically, physically, more dehumanizing and just as dehumanizing as extreme labor, workage, overworkage. They went through a process of a system called slave breeding. And the name of this video, let me go ahead and throw it in there, is Virginia, the slave breeding state, the slave coast, the capitalized womb. This is what we're going to talk about here today. This is about the black woman today and the black man. This is about the new African man and the new African woman and something that they had to go through that was so horrific. For money, for capitalism, for extreme labor. The capitalized black womb was exploited, and what you know today came into existence, which is the empire of the United States of America, and this capitalist economy came off of forced, induced pregnancies. How many of you heard of that? How many have you heard of that? Forced, induced pregnancies. Meaning, for those who don't understand what I'm saying, when I say forced, induced pregnancies, what am I speaking on? What am I talking about? I'm talking about sisters, African sisters, black women, new African women who were forced to get pregnant, not under their own will of their sovereignty. Not under their own will as a sovereign human being. Under their own choice, they were forced to get pregnant. How many of you heard of that? How many of you heard of that? This what was going on the plantations of the South, people. Specifically, geographically, the upper South states, Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland. The upper South states were the breeding grounds of the most horrific terrorism to take place on a people. Sexual terrorism. Write that down. Sexual terrorism. Think about it. Just think about it. First of all, you were kidnapped off of another continent, brought to another continent, stripped of your name, stripped of your culture, but then was forced to bring into existence in a horrific system of bondage, a capitalist system. You were then forced to produce more human beings to come into existence, to become what you are in at this point in time, which is slavery, a system of dehumanizing capture. Think about that. Think about that. You were forced to bring into existence life through your sacred space, your sacred body and vessel, which is the basis of a nation, is your womb. You're forced to bring into existence life through the vessel in the body of a nation, the womb of a black woman, to create more life, to become enslaved captives, to work the rest of their life in bondage. Think about that. Think about that. A woman going through the extreme conditioning and abuse physically and mentally and biologically to produce life, to become slaves, to produce work for a system and a group of terrorists, oppressors, settler colonialists, to fatten up their generational wealth based off of the black womb. Producing more life, kids, babies, to become slaves on a plantation to work their lives to make money for your oppressors who continue to govern you today. Your oppressors. The sacred womb was violated. The sacred womb of the African woman was violated in slavery, forcing her to go through something without her consent of her sovereign being as a national, as a woman, a concrete human being coming from different nations of peoples, forced to produce more kids in life for somebody else to sell their kids away to plantations in the deeper South to exploit them for their labor. This is one of the most profitable businesses and systems ever created through sexual terrorism, was creating and producing life to sell and to work on plantations. The black body in the black womb. The black body in the black womb is the most specific, pinpoint, concrete basis of the economy of the empire of the United States of America, was selling your babies, making your women and men procreate. Procreation was violated because the procreation process wasn't done willingly, freely. The process that we know as African people were violated in slavery. You're taking different nationals. Listen to what I'm telling you. And this is where the new African comes from. You're taking different nationals, ethnic groups from different nations and tribes of people from West Africa, Central Africa, bring them here to North America. And then when they get here, you have to be forced to procreate with other nations, other tribes of people that you may not, necessarily in your homeland, procreate with and create children with. You feel me? You might not necessarily would procreate with these individuals back in the homeland, because we know how the ethnicity and the ethnic groups are set up in Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, and how, they keep their nationals to themselves. They keep their peoples based on their self and their nation and their bloodlines. So you take these people from their nations, their homeland, bring them here, and then violate their will of freedom, and violate their will of sovereignty to make them create babies. The black woman was violated. The black woman was violated. Some of these individuals were little girls. Some of these individuals were little girls. Little girls forced to slave breed with other men to produce babies for slavery. What is more concrete than that to get to force this government to pay up reparations? What is more concrete than this evidence? This is the ultimate evidence. And then you got to understand, they were raping our women. They were raping our little girls. The plantation owner, the white man, were raping our little girls. Were raping our women, forcing them to have more kids to enslave. The black womb is the concrete basis of the capitalist economic system you see today in America because it was exploited. It produced bodies to sell to increase the wealth of our oppressors. Facts. The black womb. Not only with the selling of individuals and breaking up families, and when they broke up these families, kidnapping and separating and breaking up families, they take nationals and ethnic groups, merge them together, produce babies for slave labor. Here in Virginia was the largest slave breeding farm in history, right outside of Richmond. Right side out of Richmond. There were 2 slave breeding farms in America who concreted and facilitated one of the most terroristic, dehumanizing acts on a people in history. One was outside of Richmond, Virginia. The other was outside of Baltimore, Maryland. Yes. One was outside of Baltimore, Maryland. One was outside of Richmond, Virginia. But Richmond, Virginia had the largest slave breeding farm in history. Virginia is the state that produced slave babies to be sold to the deeper South. This is where the deeper South got all their enslaved Africans from. The upper South, Kentucky, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee. You all got your enslaved peoples from Virginia. Because Virginia was slave breeding at so much of a high rate that southern plantation owners and southern plantations were bragging. They were bragging about how Virginia is the slave breeding farm, the slave breeding state of forced procreation on African black people. And nobody's talking about this? Why is it never brought up? Why are people scared to talk about slave breeding? This shit happened. This shit happened. And it produced a new nation out of something chaotic and dehumanizing. Producing so many peoples at that high rate. At that high rate. At that high rate, man. And if you didn't see my slave breeding petition yet, please sign it. It's in this bio of this live. Please share it with everybody that you know, man. Because it goes into my next part of this live on what I'm really talking about when it comes to reparatory justice. Look here, people. Look here. Reparatory justice doesn't have to be solely based on suing the United States of America or the federal government of the United States of America. This is something I want you to learn, understand, and write this down. Because you're starting to see it take place all in America right now. You're starting to see it take place. All you got to do is Google reparations. You're going to start to see what's going on right now. But what I'm saying is this, is that reparatory justice is not just profounded on suing the United States of America. Guess what else is it predicated on? You can sue your local city and your local state for reparations. This is something that you're seeing going on right now. You can sue locally. You can sue your city, or you can sue the state. Matter of fact, the process should be like this. And in a lot of cases throughout our struggle in the Black Liberation Movement, it has been like this. But in these times, standing on the shoulders of Queen Mother Moore, standing on the shoulders of Amari Obadeli, the mother and father of modern reparations, is that you can do it threefold. You can sue the federal government for reparations. Secondfold, you can sue your city for reparations. Thirdfold, you can sue your state for reparations. Threefold. We have three strategies and three folds at a reparatory justice struggle. This is why I created the petition, Virginia, the slave breeding state. We demand reparations now for sexual terrorism. Because us as Africans, new Africans, we must take it upon ourselves not only to hold the federal government responsible for the Ma'afa, the genocide, the enslavement, slave breeding, but we must hold accountable these states where these plantations operated in. The South. You must hold these southern states and these southern cities accountable for reparations. This is just something that you need to educate yourself on when it comes to reparatory justice. We must hold the southern states that held our people in bondage accountable for dehumanizing acts of violating human rights of our ancestors sexually. This is why I took the approach, because I know Virginia's history. I know our people's history in Virginia. I'm a native Virginian. So if I want to hold this nation, or whatever you want to call it, empire, accountable, I must start on the local level. We must start on the local and state level. Do the research. Find out the crimes and the human rights violations that took place on your ancestors if you live in a southern state. Find out what happened in your state if you live in a southern state. From Virginia to Texas. This is the concrete basis of our reparation struggle. The southern states. So do the research and find out what happened there to your ancestors, like I'm doing now with the slave breeding. And slave breeding is the most concrete. It's the most concrete basis for reparations. What more evidence do we need to prove that you owe us reparations than slave breeding? Making people go perform sexual acts through force. What's more violating of human rights than that? Than a person being violated biologically, physically. Our women, the womb, the basis of the capitalist economy of the empire of America was the black womb being violated. Our black women human rights were violated. Our black men human rights were violated. His phallus was violated because he forced his phallus to fertilize the womb that they're exploiting to create more human beings to become slaves. What's more concrete and violated than that? The black man, the black woman was violated sexually. Our bodies were violated for value to our oppressor nation. It gave value and equity to their economy, to their family's generational wealth, was exploiting men, phallus, and women's wombs. Sexual terrorism is real. You hear them bickering and beefing over there every day about pedophiles, about rapists. Well, let's talk about what you did to our ancestors and what you forced our ancestors to go through. In some cases, they also created more pedophiles in slave breeding also. Because they had older men sleeping with younger sisters to create more babies for the slavery system. So if you do the analysis and be analytical about what happened, you must understand the concrete conditions. You must understand the conditions of slavery, man. You have to. You have to understand the conditions that these people went through socially. You got to understand the conditions, what they went through socially, and to understand us today. You can't understand us today if you don't understand the concrete struggle and the hypocrisy and the terrorism that they went through for 400 years, 300 years on the plantation like that, man. You have to understand what happened to these people, man. And this is keep getting left out. And I'm not going to let it keep getting left out. Slave breeding is something that we must talk about. We must put a spotlight on it. Period. It happened. This is how a lot of us are here today. A lot of us are descendants of slave breeding. Period. This is why we have so many ethnic groups in one person. Period. And the reason they did it, which makes it a violation of human rights, is that they were playing off genetics, your biological system of who you are as a human being, to create more slaves. They created a system to wean out the weaker enslaved political prisoner or individual. They did this to spice together genes and genetics biologically to create a strong working individual who would be enslaved and do the slave labor. In other cases, it was pure business. They just needed more bodies to sell to increase their wealth, their generational wealth. They just needed quantity, is what they call it in business today. Slave breeding was a system for quantity and at times quality. But at the same time, both merged together for exploitation, quality and quantity. So you can see today that every capitalistic way of conducting business today was founded on the enslavement of your ancestors, the terroristic acts, the human rights violations of your ancestors. Every economic way of doing things in America, business, corporation-wise, is founded on slavery. Slave breeding is the foundation of the capitalist system of America, the empire. Black bodies were valuable for an economic system and generational wealth and equity for the oppressors. Period. And like I stated, we have to do this on the local and state level. This is why I chose to thrust Virginia in the spotlight, to hold them guilty, hold them accountable and guilty for their acts of what they did to the ancestors in Virginia, which would produce more dehumanizing and human rights violations to the South, to the deeper South, because you're producing more bodies to sell to the deeper South, which created a system of capitalism, generational wealth for the others, not the brothers. Period. Let me read this real quick. Slave breeding was one of the most dehumanizing tyrannical systems to ever be used on humankind. Did you hear that? Slave breeding was one of the most dehumanizing tyrannical systems to ever be used on mankind, specifically African people, young women that capitalized womb, were often advertised for sale of good breeding stock. They were breeding your ancestors like they breed horses. They were breeding your ancestors like they were breeding pit bulls. Think about that. They did one of the most dehumanizing human rights violations on your ancestors in comparison to breeding of horses and dogs. Think about that. They breed your ancestors like horses and dogs. This actually happened. I know this shit is shocking to a lot of people, because when a lot of people come across my petition, when a lot of people come across my videos on slave breeding or my blogs on slave breeding, this shit is a shocker to a lot of African people and even white people, that humans, new African humans, were being breeded like dogs and horses. Yes, it happened. And it happened as a natural system for white folks. It was a natural, cultural way economically for white folks. Breeding humans, black bodies were being breeded like stock cattle in Virginia. To encourage childbearing, some population owners promised women slaves their freedom after they had produced at least 15 children. Let me say that again, in case you're not catching it. To encourage more childbearing, the white population slave owners promised African women enslaved political prisoners their freedom if they could produce 15 children or more. 15 children or more. And then in some cases, they were never freed after they bared 15 children. Can you imagine your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother having 15 babies that were all taken from them and sold to plantations throughout the South to never see again? Can you imagine that? Your mother or your grandmother or even your daughter, because these were pedophiles. The plantation owners were pedophiles. They were forcing kids as sisters, little girls at the youngest age of childbearing, puberty, as young as little baby girls that just came into puberty to bear at least 15 children. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the biological effect that it took place on her womb and her body? Little African girls, black girls, breeding and having kids as young as the age of 10. Some cases, 9. In some cases, at the age of 9. 9 to 15. Let's use that age group. 9 to 15, bearing 15 kids. Think about that. If you got a little sister or have a little sister, think about that. Forced to have babies with men that they don't know. Forcing them to have kids with men they don't know, and men twice their age, and raped by the plantation owner twice their age to produce more enslaved babies. Check it out. One slave trader in Virginia used to brag and boasted that he successfully breeded policies to enable him to sell 6,000 slave children per year. How about that? One Virginia plantation slave owner boasted and was proud to produce 6,000 African black bodies and children and babies to sell a year from slave breeding farms. 6,000 children a year. Check this point out. In fact, most enslaved Africans were not kidnapped on another continent. Check it out. Check it out. Pay attention. This ain't none of that pseudo shit. Pay attention. Though over 12.7 million Africans were forced onto ships to the Western Hemisphere, landing in present-day America between 300,000 to 500,000. Some say 400 to 500,000 to North America. How then could we account for the 4 million enslaved brothers and sisters who were tilling in fields in 1860? How do we know? How is this possible? One news editor in one newspaper of the South back then stated that not only did we produce tobacco, rice, sugar, cotton, commodities for sale, we produced people. We produced people. They were out here producing people as product. Black bodies were product that they were producing as a commodity, as commerce. Black bodies, brothers and sisters. They produced people and they boasted and bragged about producing more people for enslavement. Enslavers in Virginia called slave breeding a natural increase, but there was nothing natural about it, producing slaves. It took scientific management. It took scientific management. Thomas Jefferson, pay attention, Thomas Jefferson, one of the so-called founding fathers, along with another so-called founding father, Thomas Jefferson once bragged to George Washington that the birth of a black child was increasing in Virginia's capital stock by 4% annually. Stock markets. Where do you think the stock market come from? Where do you think Wall Street come from? Wall Street investments and stock holding was founded on the origin of slave breeding, producing black children and black bodies to sell. Producing black bodies to sell. This is where Wall Street come from. This is where investing in stock come from. Your ancestors were the first investment in stocks and bonds in American history. The black bodies, the sacred capitalized womb of the black woman, the African woman, was the first investment in white generational wealth in American history. The black womb of the black queen. Period. Scientifically managed. They managed the black womb. The black womb is the foundation of the black nation. They exploited a nation by exploiting the womb of the black woman. Our grandmothers, our great-great-grandmothers, our great-great-great-great-grandfathers. Phallus and womb was exploited for investments, stocks, annually to create more babies for enslavement. Period. Everything American is wrong. Everything American is wrong. It was founded in the wrong. Everything American is wrong. Its economic system is wrong. Its values is wrong. Its morals is wrong. America is wrong. Reparatory justice is right. Reparatory justice is right. Here's how the American slave breeding industry worked. Some states, most importantly, Virginia, produced slaves as their main domestic crop. The price of slaves was anchored by industry in other states that consumed slaves in the production of rice and sugar and constant territorial expansion. As long as the slave power, the work power, continued to grow, breeders slave breeders could literally bank on a future demand and increasing prices that made slaves not just commodity, but the closest thing to money that white breeders had was your ancestors. The closest thing to money was your ancestors' black bodies, forced into sexual acts to produce more bodies of black people to sell, exploit for generational wealth. They said your ancestors was the closest thing to money that the white breeder had. The closest thing to money that the white breeder had to money was selling black babies. By a conservative estimate, this coming from the right wing, from a conservative estimate in 1860, the total value of American slaves was $4 billion. Far more than gold and silver circulating nationally, 228.3 million. Most of it in the North. Don't leave the North out. What I tell you on the last video I did live. Don't you ever leave the northern part of the United States out, because they capitalized off black bodies and slave breeding just as the South did. The North was just as worse as the South. Period. They all made money off of slave breeding. They all made money. The United States of America, white nation, and the Confederate States of the South, white nation, all profited off of selling and breeding your ancestors. To what you see today, the United States Empire. And even the value of South's total farmland would estimated be $1.92 billion. Slaves were to slavers worth more than everything else they could imagine combined. Slaves to their enslaver were worth more than everything else they could ever imagine combined. Reparations now. We deserve reparations now. In 30 years leading up to the Civil War, the upper southern states began breeding slaves for export. There goes the export business. Import, export. The shipping business. The shipping business that international capitalists are making so much money off today by selling products, resources. The export, import business started off of selling black bodies that were breeding. They started to export our enslaved brothers and sisters from the north, from the upper states of the South to the deeper states of the South, which was a whole nother business within itself, which was the domestic slave trade, the international slave trade, the highway slave trade, the downriver slave trade. Came out of the process of breeding farms, the breeding industry of human beings. Before that, there had been some moral concerns about breeding human beings, like cattle, even among those who own human beings as though they were cattle. The Virginia Times Weekly stated that estimates in 1836 stated that the number of slaves exported for sale from the state alone during 12 months preceding at 40,000. The aggregate value of whom is computed at $24 million, allowing for Virginia one half of the whole exportation during the period in question. We have the sum of 80,000 slaves exported in a single year from the breeding states. Maryland ranks next to Virginia in point of numbers. North Carolina follows Maryland, Kentucky, then Tennessee and Delaware. The Natchez, Mississippi Courier says that the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas imported 250,000 slaves from more than upper South states in the year 1836. Richmond, this is another key point. Richmond, where I live at, with its central spot and favorable access to rivers, canals, railroads, snaking all through the state and to the coast, overtook Alexandria as the state's leading slave market. Estimates of 10,000 people monthly moving through Richmond are high. Other historical sources place the number during 1840s between 1,000 and 8,000. They were sold at dozens of slave auctions that made up Shakur's business district from 14th to 21st Streets and Dock to Broad Streets. The Civil War ended the trade, but even up to the Fall City in April 1865 occupied the 1st Black Union Infantry. The trade continued unabated. Records at the time show individual slaves, healthy field hands, selling for upwards of $2,000. Women described in the newspaper, advertised as being healthy and childbearing age, were priced above all but skilled tradesmen. Childbearing age. They were selling your little baby sisters, your little baby girls at childbearing age. That is human rights violation, people. That is what you call today human trafficking. What makes this human trafficking different than the human trafficking that's taking place today? And black girls, little black girls are still going missing today. What you think are happening to the black little sisters today? The black women today that are being kidnapped. They're still being facilitated in a slave trading, sex trafficking ring. Today. The same shit is going on today. The Ma'afa, the genocide, the sexual terrorism continues today because they still kidnapping black girls. They still kidnapping black new African sisters today at childbearing age. And they're disappearing every day in America. Where are they going? What is happening to them? The slave breeding system never stopped. The slave breeding system never stopped. It continues today. In the sex slave trade today. In closing, as I get out, in closing, at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Charles C. Pinckney explained that Virginia will gain by stopping importation from Africa. Her slaves will rise in value and she has more than she wants. We believe as New African people living in America, our ancestors' human rights were violated and are due compensation alone for the tyrannical act of slave breeding. No humans has ever went through this act in history. The American economy benefited and made millions of dollars of wealth off of breeding and selling black bodies. We as the new African nation demand reparations under the human rights of a people, under the Universal Act of Human Rights. We demand reparations because the United States Empire benefited off the tyrannical act of slave breeding. And this reparatory justice can be handled state and city. It's something that you have to understand. Write that down. We can file and take this petition to the Supreme Court or to the International Court of the United Nations for violation of human rights through slave breeding. We can sue the state of Virginia. We can sue the city of Richmond. and sue the federal government of the United States of America for this tyrannical act. So I want you, brothers and sisters, write it down. Slave breeding, it existed. It existed, people. Let's open up the dialogue. Let's spread the word of what they did to you and our ancestors through biological, physical, sexual, terrorism, scientifically, the selling of black bodies for commodity, for generational wealth for white people, for equity for white people. They violated the sacred black womb. They violated the sacred black phallus. They violated the new African nation. They violated the African continent on slave breeding farms here in Virginia and the upper northern states of the South. Violation. And we demand that they compensate us as African people and a new African nation of people. We demand reparations today. And I'm going to sign off on that note. Haki Kweli Shakur, man. Ike Chukwu out, man. Do your research on slave breeding, man. Free the land by any means necessary. And sign and share the petition. Spread the word about slave breeding, man.